Hello everyone, welcome to the segment called Blade Running. Today I'm talking to Connor Murphy, a CCSU student and an amateur rollerblader, also known as inline skating. Connor, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Shane.
So what is inline skating?
Well, it's an extreme sport. I use that term kind of lightly. It's kind of the same grouping as like skateboarding or BMX or anything of that nature. I think people usually think of rollerblading and they think of like the whole 90s depiction where it's just somebody with some really colorful boots riding around town saying words like tubular and stuff like that. But really in the early 90s it kind of ingrained into its own culture, and people found that you can ride rollerblades around skate parks and whatnot, which was really kind of just like a given.
How did you start?
I started like 2 years ago, roughly. I just really been into skateboarding culture and stuff like that throughout most of my life. I have a family of 5 brothers, obviously you know that, but we all grew up skateboarding together. My dad would take us out every weekend, and as I grew older, I realized that I had no talent for skateboard at all, actually. I hadn't really learned anything over a couple years of practicing, and not being a quitter, I kind of tried to pose the question of if there was something else I was good at that was in lieu of that. And eventually, I'd just been watching, I watched Rocket Power and stuff as a kid, and all that sort of, the media that depicted these things in a good light. And I sort of asked the question if rollerblading was something I could get into. And I watched a lot of edits and a lot of media that just surrounded good rollerblading press, and it sort of pushed me to say like, hey, maybe this is a good idea. And me and my buddy ended up just taking the leap. Like I said, 2 years ago during the summer, we both just bought a pair of skates and tried to give it a go for that summer and found that we just loved it.
What is your process of learning a new trick?
Oh, wow. Lots of falling. There's a ton of falling that goes into it. A lot of it ends up being where you first go over, and a lot of rollerblading is centered around grinding, like rails. So you'll go over and you'll see if you can stall it on that rails first, see if you can just get the balance of the trick, see if you can hop into it, maybe take it at a slower speed, and sort of work your way up to coming at it full speed and just kind of getting the commitment over with, which I find a lot of the time is really what it comes down to. Athletically speaking, I think most people have the ability to rollerblade, or even just extreme sports in general. I think most people have the ability to do it. We all have arms and legs, so I think it's a skill that can be attained, but a lot of it comes down to the practice and really just getting over the fear of landing something, of maybe not landing it, because that happens all the time.
Do you prefer skating streets or parks?
That's a tough one. I think it comes down to kind of both, in a sense. You learn to love both for what they are. I like street skating because it poses new challenges, looking at obstacles in different ways, and then you'd normally look at them, say, just looking at a handrail, and all right, I use that to walk down the stairs, but coming at it from a different way where you can maybe come off a kicker, which is a tiny ramp, and maybe grind down the rail and throw a spin at the end of it or something, or even just throw more style into it than that, I think is a really cool aspect of street skating. But there's something to love about going to a park where you know that it was made for this idea, and really just being able to get a nice smooth ride and kind of just exercise a little bit, I think is great. So really it's a split between the both, you know?
Let's see. What are some of your favorite parks to go to?
In Connecticut, it's kind of difficult because you find that a lot of the parks were made like a pretty long time ago. So some of them just kind of suck, like they're just terrible. It'll be like a metal park and the transition to concrete is non-existent, so you'll just go from an angle to flat and, kind of just have to deal with it. But then you find that the newer parks, say like Rockwell in Bristol, that park is like beautiful. That was designed, I think, actually by by someone who works with the X Games, and all the ramps, you can just see like the amount of craft and love that really went into that park. I think it's a great thing, really.
So You were saying that rollerblading had a big kind of boom in the 90s, and was it dead for a little while, or like what sort of brought it back into the spotlight?
We actually have a term for that, or like a saying. We call it barely dead, where where sort of it sees resurgences, these really tiny ones throughout our generations and whatnot. So like the early 90s was a really great time. They were just coming out. There wasn't a lot of good technology for skates. So things weren't really refined yet. No one had style or anything. But a huge amount of money was being pumped into the sport at this point because it was new. I mean, it was like skateboarding when it first started. Mm-hmm. But that sort of had backlash, actually, to the extent that those same communities that had been doing this before grew sort of contempt for this new thing, because it was like, hey, like, we're the new kids. We deserve our bucks too, you know? Mm-hmm. Joining the X Games, where there's a bunch of trained athletes who have been doing this for so long, working for money. So there was a lot of backlash there, and you saw a big dying out after, because the social stigma was put on rollerblading actually for a while. And it still is. I mean, I remember back when I first started, I was rolling down the street and some guy threw a pen at me and muttered some ridiculous saying out of the window. But it made me realize that, like, these things are kind of still not where they could be. The social stigma surrounding rollerblading isn't exactly that great. So you kind of gotta, like, you go to the skate park and you show off a little bit because you wanna prove that, like, you are core too. Mm-hmm. You deserve to be in with these guys, and you sort of develop like a mutual respect through that, which is kind of nice. But it definitely died off in the 90s.
Well, Connor, it's been great talking to you. This has been Blade Running, and thank you for watching.